A jumbo jet fell over 4 miles in 2 minutes. An airliner had its controls wired backwards. By every law of physics, they should be remembered as history's worst disasters. But none of them are, because they didn't crash. These are the worst plane crashes that never happened. Subscribe to Terra Obscura. Let's begin. It is 2 minutes before midnight at San Francisco International Airport. 4 airliners are waiting in line on taxiway Charlie. Their engines are running, their lights are on. Each one has been cleared in sequence to depart from runway 28 right. The first in line is a United Airlines Boeing 787 heading for Singapore. Behind it sits a Philippine Airlines Airbus A340 full of passengers bound for Manila. Behind that, another United Boeing 787. And behind that, a United Boeing 737. Almost 1,000 people sit inside those 4 aircraft. Air Canada Flight 759 has just crossed the San Francisco Bay shoreline. It is an Airbus A320 out of Toronto. The captain has been awake for 19 hours. The first officer has been awake for 12. They have been cleared to land on runway 28 right, but they are not lined up with runway 28 right. San Francisco Airport has 2 parallel runways on this side of the field, runway 28 left and runway 28 right. On this night, the left runway is closed for construction. Its lights are dark. A flashing white marker sits at its threshold. The captain looks ahead and sees a lit runway on his left and a lit strip on his right. He believes the lit runway on his left is 28 left and that the lit strip on his right is his runway. He is wrong. The lit runway on his left is 28 right, and the strip on his right, the strip with 4 full airliners parked on it, is taxiway Charlie. Neither pilot has tuned the instrument landing system. The needles that would have warned them they were off course remain dark and silent. 3/4 of a mile from the threshold, the first officer mentions that something looks off. The captain agrees. He keys his radio and asks the tower to confirm that the runway is clear. The controller is alone in the tower. His partner is on a scheduled break. He scans the strip on his display. Runway 28 right is empty. Whatever lights the Air Canada pilot is describing must belong to departing aircraft on the parallel taxiway. He confirms that the runway is clear and that the Airbus is the only one approaching. The Airbus passes through 200 feet, still descending, still lined up with the taxiway. In the cockpit of the Philippine Airlines, the captain looks up through his windshield and sees landing lights coming straight down toward him. He keys his radio and asks the tower a single question. He wants to know where that aircraft is going. In the cockpit of the United 787 sitting first in line, the captain has already flicked his landing lights on and off, trying to flash a warning into the dark. The aircraft passes over the United 787 at less than 100 feet. It passes over the Philippine A340 at 60 feet, the lowest point of the entire approach. The bottom of its landing gear clears the Philippine tail by a distance somewhere between 3 and 6 meters. Then the airplane begins to climb. The tower controller, watching from the glass cab, finally understands what he is looking at. He keys his microphone and tells the Airbus to go around. The aircraft is already going around. 16 minutes later, Air Canada Flight 759 lands on runway 28 right. The passengers walk off the airplane and disappear into the terminal. None of them are aware that they have just flown 3 meters above another airliner full of people. Investigators would later count every soul on the 4 aircraft on taxiway Charlie and every soul on Flight 759. The total came to just over 1,000. Former NTSB Chairman Jim Hall called this the most significant near miss of the decade. An Embraer 190 operated by Kazakhstan's national airline sat grounded for 40 days in a hangar at Alverca Air Base, just north of Lisbon. The plane was undergoing heavy maintenance by AGMA, a company contracted by Air Astana. Among the work items was the replacement of the aileron control cables, which connected the cockpit yoke to the wing surfaces that banked the plane left and right. On October 9th, mechanics disconnected the existing cables so new pulleys could be installed. When they reinstalled the cables, they connected them incorrectly. When the yoke was pulled left, the plane would bank right. When it was pulled right, the plane would bank left. Every roll input would reach the wings in the reverse direction. The ground testing was flawed. The plane's other roll assist surfaces, the spoilers, were connected separately and responded correctly to pilot inputs. So an initial system check made part of the system look normal, while a deeper failure remained hidden. On November 11th, 2018, the plane was pulled from the hangar. 3 Air Astana pilots had arrived in Lisbon to fly the aircraft home. Captain Vyacheslav Aushev was in command. Bauerjan Karasholikov was the first officer, and Sergei Sokolov was seated in the jump seat. 3 Air Astana maintenance engineers were also in the cabin. The plan was simple. Fly the aircraft to Minsk, then continue on to Almaty. That plan failed almost immediately after takeoff. At 1:31 in the afternoon, the Embraer lifted off into low cloud. Captain Auchev raised the nose and began a gentle turn. The plane did not respond correctly. Instead of banking with the pilot's inputs, it began rolling violently from side to side. Each correction pushed the aircraft into a more extreme version of the same problem. The pilots tried to engage the autopilot, but it would not stay on. The aircraft was too unstable. The Embraer banked violently over the coast of Portugal. At one point, it was inverted. The airframe had not been designed to survive that kind of stress, and sections of the aircraft began to deform. Captain Auchev told Lisbon Approach that they had a flight control malfunction. He could not maintain heading or direction. He requested a climb to 10,000 feet to stay clear of terrain. Two F-16 fighters from Monte Real Air Base were scrambled and found the aircraft. They stayed close, giving controllers and the crew an outside view of the unstable Embraer. In the cockpit, the crew realized the roll commands were reversed. To roll left, they had to move the yoke right. To roll right, they had to move it left. They were fighting years of instinct, but even that did not fully solve the problem. The spoilers were still responding normally, while the ailerons were responding in reverse. The two systems were fighting each other. The captain considered ditching and asked to be vectored toward the sea. If the aircraft became completely uncontrollable, he wanted to be over water. For 90 minutes, the Embraer limped through the sky under fighter escort. The crew tried different ways to control it, but nothing worked cleanly. Eventually, air traffic control directed them to Baia Air Base, about 80 miles southeast of Lisbon. It had a long runway. The first approach failed. The second failed too. Each time, the aircraft drifted away from the runway, and the crew had to go around. On the third attempt, the relief first officer moved into the right seat. The aircraft lined up for runway 19 right, but again, it began drifting left. At the last moment, Captain Auchev accepted the drift and aimed for the parallel runway. He landed the Embraer sideways, skidding across the runway and almost leaving the surface before it finally stopped. The investigation later found that the aileron cables had been connected backwards during maintenance. OGMA did not have the technical experience required for the task. Embraer's maintenance instructions had not clearly warned against this exact error. The crew had also failed to detect the reversal before flight. The plane never flew again. It was scrapped. Everyone on board survived. One person had a sprained ankle. The trainee at the radar console in Togorozawa is 26 years old. He has been on the job for 10 months. On the afternoon of January 31st, 2001, he is responsible for 10 flights at once. 2 of them belong to Japan Airlines. Both are full. They are heading directly toward each other. Japan Airlines. Flight 907 is a Boeing 747 carrying 411 passengers and 16 crew. It departed Tokyo Haneda at 3:36 in the afternoon, bound for Naha Airport in Okinawa. The captain in the left seat is Makoto Watanabe. He is 40 years old. Heading the other direction is Japan Airlines Flight 958, a Douglas DC-10 with 237 passengers and 13 crew. It is on the descending leg of an international flight from Busan in South Korea to Tokyo Narita. The captain is Tatsuyuki Akazawa. He is 45. According to the flight plan, the 2 aircraft will cross paths over Suruga Bay with 2,000 feet of vertical separation between them. 2,000 feet is enough. But the trainee makes a mistake. The 747 is climbing through 37,000 feet on its way to 39,000. The DC-10 is cruising at 37,000. On the trainee's screen, the 2 blips are converging. He intends to instruct the DC-10 to descend below the climbing jumbo. Instead, he calls the wrong flight number. He tells the 747 to descend. Captain Watanabe acknowledges. He levels off and starts back down. At the same moment, the traffic collision avoidance systems in both aircraft come alive. These systems are known by their acronym TCAS. The TCAS on the 747 tells its pilots to climb. The TCAS on the DC-10 tells its pilots to descend. The 2 systems have negotiated with each other across the empty air. If both crews follow the advisory, the aircraft will separate. But Watanabe is now reading back a controller instruction to descend. The TCAS warning sounds in the background of his radio call. He continues the descent. Captain Akazawa in the DC-10 follows his TCAS. He pushes the nose down. Both aircraft are now descending into the same piece of sky. The trainee realizes the DC-10 is not descending the way he expected. He calls it and tells it to turn right. The transmission does not reach the cockpit. The senior controller next to him sees the same thing. She tries to call the 747 directly. In her panic, she uses a flight number that does not exist. The transmission goes nowhere. In the cabin of the jumbo, the captain has just turned off the seatbelt sign. The flight attendants are wheeling drink carts down the aisle. Watanabe and his first officer look up from the panel. Through the windshield, closing on them at over 600 miles an hour of relative speed, is the underside of a Douglas DC-10. Watanabe pushes the yoke forward, hard. The jumbo goes into a sharp dive. The DC-10 passes overhead at the same instant. The investigation board later determined that at the closest point, the two airliners were separated vertically by 130 feet. If the jumbo had been 3 meters higher in the moment it passed beneath the DC-10, the vertical fin of one would have struck the underside of the other. If the collision had happened, 677 people would have died over Suruga Bay. The toll would have surpassed Tenerife and become the deadliest aviation accident in history. The 747 returned to Haneda. 100 people on board were injured, 9 of them seriously. 2 years later, the International Civil Aviation Organization changed its rules. From that point forward, when a pilot received a TCAS command and a controller's instruction at the same time, the pilot was required to follow the TCAS. China Airlines Flight 006, a Boeing 747, has been crossing the Pacific Ocean from Taipei to Los Angeles. 251 passengers and 23 crew are on board. The flight is in cruise at 41,000 feet, 300 nautical miles northwest of San Francisco. Captain Ho Min Yuan is in the left seat. He is 55 years old. He has flown more than 15,000 hours. The first officer is Chong Ju Yue. The flight engineer is Wei Kuo Pin. All three have just returned from a 5-hour rest break. At 10:11, the number 4 engine on the right wing begins to lose power. The fault is small. A fuel control valve worn down by 1/10 of a millimeter is throttling the supply of fuel to the engine. The engine will not accelerate cleanly. It hangs. Wei tries to recover it by moving the throttle back and forth. It does not respond. He works the recovery procedure from memory and skips one step. On the right wing, the engine continues to produce only about 2/3 of normal thrust. The asymmetry produces a slow yaw to the right. The autopilot applies a left-wing down input on the ailerons. As the airplane decelerates, the autopilot applies more and more aileron. Eventually, it reaches its maximum allowed input, 22.9 degrees of left-wing down. The airplane begins to bank to the right anyway, slowly. Captain Ho is focused on the falling airspeed. He does not notice that the autopilot is at the limit of its authority. He does not have his hands on the column. First Officer Chang says they are banking right. Ho stays focused on the airspeed. He instructs Wei to attempt an in-flight engine restart, even though they are far above the altitude where a restart is supposed to work. It fails. The aircraft continues to slow. It continues to roll right, passing 45 degrees of bank. The pilots are inside a cloud. There is no visible horizon outside. Then Captain Ho disconnects the autopilot. The autopilot stops applying 22.9 degrees of left wing down. The aileron returns to neutral. The forces that were being held in check are released all at once. The airplane rolls hard to the right. It passes 90 degrees. It rolls upside down. The 747 goes inverted at 41,000 feet. The pilots are completely disoriented. The clouds outside have given them no horizon. First Officer Chang says aloud that the attitude indicators must be broken. They are not broken. The airplane is upside down. Captain Ho pulls back on the column. In an inverted aircraft, pulling back is a command to dive. The airplane plunges toward the ocean. In the cabin, anyone not strapped down is thrown against a wall. Captain Ho has pulled all 4 throttles to idle to slow the airplane. In 33 seconds, the 747 falls 10,000 feet. It rolls back through level, pitches up sharply, pulls almost 5G on the airframe, then rolls right again, inverts a second time, and dives a second time. The airplane is tearing itself apart in midair. 3.5 meters of the left horizontal stabilizer rip away. 1.5 meters of the right stabilizer is gone. The main landing gear tears free of its mountings inside the wing. A panel flies off the left aileron. The auxiliary power unit shears loose and crashes into the rear bulkhead. The 747 is breaking up at 5G in a steep dive. At 11,000 feet, the airplane falls out of the bottom of the cloud layer. For the first time in over 2 minutes, Captain Ho can see a horizon. The Pacific Ocean is below. He rolls level, brings the engines back up, and pulls out of the dive. The airplane levels at 9,600 feet. Ho diverts to San Francisco. The airplane lands without further incident. 2 of the 274 people on board are seriously injured. 24 others have minor injuries. Investigators look at the 747 on the apron at San Francisco and conclude that there is no good explanation for why it is still in one piece. The cause was a worn valve, a missed checklist step, a captain fixated on the wrong instrument, and a body clock that thought it was 2 in the morning. The captain who lost control of the airplane was the same captain who recovered it. He had 2,000 feet of altitude left to find the horizon. He found it. Qantas Flight 32 has just departed Singapore Changi Airport on the last leg of a long route from London to Sydney. 440 passengers are on board. The flight crew is unusual because 3 of the 5 pilots are check captains. The flying captain is being checked by one. That check captain is being trained by another. The cockpit holds a combined 71,000 hours of flying experience. The captain in the left seat is Richard de Crespigny. He is 53 years old. He has flown for 32 years. 4 minutes after takeoff, climbing through 7,000 feet over the Indonesian island of Batam, the airplane shudders. The number 2 engine, the inboard engine on the left wing, explodes. In the cockpit, the pilots hear 2 sharp bangs. The autothrust disconnects. The aircraft yaws slightly to the left. The electronic centralized aircraft monitoring system begins displaying warnings. The first warning is engine 2 turbine overheat. Within the next 20 seconds, 34 more warnings appear. Inside the engine, an oil pipe smaller than a finger, with one wall thinner than a sheet of paper, has cracked and sprayed oil into a hot space behind the high-pressure turbine. The oil has caught fire. The fire has burned through 2 seals and torched the drive arm that connects the intermediate pressure turbine disc to its drive shaft. With nothing left to drive, the disc has accelerated past its design limits and burst. A turbine disc on a Trent 900 engine, when it bursts, has effectively infinite energy. Nothing can contain it. 3 large fragments leave the engine in 3 directions. One falls toward the ground and slams through a brick building on Batam, missing every person inside. 2 go upward. Both punch clean through the left wing and out the upper surface, leaving holes large enough to crawl through. Smaller pieces shower the rest of the airplane. They sever 650 wires inside the wing leading edge. They puncture the left wing fuel tank in multiple places. They cut through structural ribs, through the front spar, through the wing to fuselage joint, and through one of 2 hydraulic systems. In the cockpit, the screens fill with damage. The list, when investigators later reconstruct it, includes the loss of one of 2 hydraulic systems, 65% of the airplane's roll control, all leading edge slats, the fuel jettison system, the fire protection on 2 engines, the auto thrust, control over 4 ailerons and most spoilers, the left wing landing gear brakes, the anti-skid on the right brakes, electrical power from 2 engines, and a long list of other systems that almost no airline pilot has ever lost simultaneously. A passenger in the rear of the cabin watches the in-flight entertainment system. The tail-mounted camera is broadcasting a live feed of the aircraft in flight. The feed shows a steady stream of fuel pouring out of a hole in the left wing. For 55 minutes, the 5 pilots work through the warnings on the ECAM. Each warning has its own emergency procedure. Each procedure must be performed correctly. When they have completed all the procedures, they are still over 40 tons above their maximum landing weight. The fuel jettison system is dead. They cannot dump fuel. A check captain runs the airplane's landing performance software on a laptop. The software returns the message that landing is not possible. He corrects the input parameters and runs it again. The new result indicates that the airplane can stop on the 4-kilometer runway at Singapore Changi with 100 meters to spare. They have 1 runway in the world they can land on. De Crespigny flies the approach manually. He has lost most of his slats and many of his spoilers. The roll controls feel sluggish. He can use only one of his remaining engines to adjust airspeed, because the others have damaged control electronics. Between the slowest safe speed and the fastest safe touchdown speed, he has a margin of 3 or 4 knots. He lands the airplane on runway 20 center. It uses almost the full length of the runway. It comes to rest with 150 meters of pavement remaining. Then the brakes catch fire from overheat. Then the number 1 engine refuses to shut down because the fuel cutoff valves have been destroyed. Then the auxiliary power unit will not connect to the electrical system because the wiring is gone. Firefighters spend 3 hours trying to drown the number 1 engine in foam before it finally spools down. 469 people walk off the airplane through a single set of stairs, an hour after landing. Not one is injured. The cause was a single oil pipe, manufactured at a Rolls-Royce facility in the United Kingdom, with one wall thinner than the design called for by less than half a millimeter. It begins with a sound. At 7:07 in the morning of May 14, 2018, an Airbus A319 is flying over the mountains of Sichuan province. In the cockpit, Captain Liu Chuanjian and First Officer Xu Ruichen hear a sharp crack from the front of the aircraft. Liu looks across the panel and sees the windshield in front of his first officer beginning to fracture. He immediately calls air traffic control and requests a descent toward Chengdu Shuangliu, the nearest major airport. Then the windshield breaks away. At 32,000 feet, the cockpit loses pressure almost instantly. Air rushes out with violent force, pulling anything unsecured toward the opening. First Officer Xu is still in his seat. but the force drags his upper body out of the aircraft. Only his harness keeps him from being thrown into the sky. Half of his body is outside the cockpit, exposed to freezing air and extreme speed. Inside, the situation is nearly impossible. The cockpit door has been torn away. The autopilot is gone. Several systems are damaged. The noise is so loud that normal communication is almost impossible. Captain Liu has no oxygen mask on. His mask is near the broken windshield, and reaching for it would mean taking one hand off the controls. He does not. He keeps flying. The aircraft is shaking violently. The instruments are difficult to read. His first officer cannot help him. Air traffic control can barely hear him, and below the aircraft are mountains. Liu cannot simply dive to a lower altitude, because some peaks in the region rise high enough to make a rapid descent dangerous. He has to descend carefully, fast enough to reach breathable air, but slow enough to stay above the terrain. For several minutes, he flies by hand through the damaged cockpit, using what little he can see and feel. Eventually, the airflow changes enough for Shu to pull himself partly back inside. He is injured, bleeding, and his uniform is torn, but he is alive. For 35 minutes, Liu flies the damaged airliner toward Chengdu with no autopilot, no oxygen mask, limited systems, and 128 people on board. Once clear of the mountains, he descends toward the airport. The aircraft is still too heavy to land normally, and he cannot dump fuel. He tells the airport he will make an overweight landing. He lines up by hand, flies the approach by hand, and lands manually. But even after touchdown, the danger is not over. The auto brake does not work. The thrust reverser does not work. Liu uses the remaining braking systems to slow the aircraft. The landing roll is long. The tires burst, but the airplane stops. At 7:42 in the morning, Sichuan Airlines flight comes to rest on the runway at Chengdu Shuangliu. The first officer is taken to hospital. A flight attendant has a back injury. 27 passengers have minor injuries. No one dies. Investigators later traced the failure to the windshield seal. Moisture had entered the panel over time and damaged the wiring inside. A hidden electrical arc heated the glass until it failed. The aircraft was repaired and returned to service months later. Captain Liu became a national hero, but the most remarkable detail is still the simplest one. The first officer survived because one strap held. Austin Bergstrom International Airport disappears into fog on the morning of February 4th, 2023. Visibility on the field is 1/8 of a mile. The control tower can barely see the closer end of runway 18 left. Beyond a few hundred feet, the runway, the taxiways, the holding aircraft, all of it dissolves into white. At 6:34 in the morning, a FedEx Boeing 767 calls Austin Tower. It has flown overnight from Memphis carrying cargo and 3 pilots. 2 of them are working the flight. The third is jump seating in the cockpit. The captain is Hugo Carvajal. The first officer is Robert Bradin. They are flying a Category 3 instrument landing approach, the kind of approach used when pilots cannot see the runway until the last moment. The tower clears them to land on runway 18 left. A few minutes later, on the ground at the same airport, a Southwest Airlines Boeing 737 taxis up to the same runway and stops short. Inside the cabin sit 128 passengers and crew, most of them headed to Cancun for an early start to a beach vacation. The captain calls the tower and reports they are ready to depart. The controller in the tower has a plan. He will let the Southwest 737 take off first, then bring the FedEx 767 down behind it. The federal rule requires at least 2 miles of separation between the departing aircraft and the one on final approach. The FedEx flight is 3 miles out when the controller speaks. The controller clears Southwest 708 for takeoff and warns them about a heavy 767 on 3-mile final. The Southwest captain reads back the clearance, copies the traffic, and acknowledges. Then nothing happens. The Southwest 737 sits on runway 18 left without moving. For a few seconds, the captain and first officer complete final checks. They scan their instruments. They confirm headings. The aircraft does not begin its takeoff roll. In the tower, the controller cannot see the runway through the fog. The radar surface display at his console shows only that the Southwest aircraft is on the runway. He does not know if it is moving or stopped. 19 seconds pass. In those 19 seconds, the FedEx 767 covers nearly 3 miles of distance. By the time the controller realizes something is wrong, the cargo jet is less than a mile from the threshold. He keys his microphone and asks the Southwest if they are rolling. The Southwest captain replies that he is rolling now. But rolling now is not airborne. The Boeing 737 is just beginning to accelerate. It is still on the runway. It is still close to walking pace. In the cockpit of the FedEx 767, First Officer Bradeen is watching the runway emerge from the fog. He sees centerline lights, then the approach lights, then At the last possible distance, a shape on the runway that should not be there. The tail of a Boeing 737. Bradeen has perhaps 2 seconds to act. He keys the radio and broadcasts a single command, telling Southwest to abort. Then he tells the tower that FedEx is going around. Captain Carvajal pulls back on the yoke. The 767, which has been descending toward the runway in landing configuration, instead pitches up and applies takeoff thrust. It crosses the runway threshold at 75 feet above sea level. The Southwest 737 is at 4 feet above the ground, just barely beginning to lift off. The two aircraft pass through the same volume of air. The FedEx 767 crosses over the Southwest 737, with somewhere between 150 and 170 feet of vertical clearance. The tail of a Boeing 737 alone stands 35 feet above the ground. The cargo aircraft passes roughly the height of a tail above the tail. In the tower, the controller is still trying to understand what he just heard. He answers the abort call by telling Southwest to turn right when able. He believes Southwest aborted the takeoff. They did not. They are airborne, and climbing on the same heading the FedEx jet is climbing. For several more seconds, the two aircraft remain in close vertical proximity, climbing on similar headings, separated only by altitude. Eventually, the controller untangles the situation. He turns Southwest one direction and FedEx the other. Southwest 708 continues to Cancun without further incident. FedEx Flight 1432 circles back and lands 12 minutes later. NTSB investigators later describe Austin as the closest near collision the United States has seen in years. By the time Royal Air Maroc Express Flight 439 takes off from Tangier on the evening of July 9, 2018, the captain has already nearly crashed the airplane once today. Earlier in the afternoon, on the same day's first approach into Al Hoceima, on the northern coast of Morocco, he descended below the minimum altitude into thick fog. The ground proximity warning system shouted at him to pull up. He leveled off 45 feet above the Mediterranean, then continued to the airport and landed. He is 61 years old. He has 13,000 hours of flying experience, but he has only 193 hours in the ATR-72. His first officer is a junior pilot with about 1,000 hours total. Now, on the second approach into Al Hoceima, the captain has decided to do it again. He has briefed his first officer on a plan that does not match any standard procedure. They will descend below the published minimum altitude. If the runway is not visible at 400 feet, they will continue level until they see it. And he has decided to deal with the alarm that interrupted him on the first approach. He reaches over and switches off the ground proximity warning system. The system is designed for one purpose. It tells pilots when they are about to fly into terrain. With the switch off, the airplane is blind to anything beneath it. At 8:01 in the evening, Flight 439 lines up with runway 17 at Al Hoceima. The cloud ceiling is 600 feet. Fog has rolled off the Mediterranean and is sitting on the surface of the water. There is no horizon outside the cockpit window. The aircraft crosses the final approach fixed, descending at 1,800 feet per minute. It is more than 80 knots above normal approach speed. The gear is not down. The flaps are not configured. Procedure requires a go-around. The captain does not go around. The first officer is at the controls. The captain sets the autopilot target altitude to 400 feet, well below the published minimum. The aircraft passes through 760 feet, the lowest altitude legally permitted for this approach. Nothing is visible outside. The captain narrates the descent. At 1,000 feet, he says, they will see the ground. At 500 feet, they will see the ground. They will continue to 300. At 445 feet, the runway is not visible. The captain reaches across the panel and increases the descent rate back to 1,800 feet per minute. The aircraft is 310 feet above the sea, dropping fast. If the ground proximity system were on, it would be screaming. The first officer slows the descent rate. He says in Arabic that this is not normal. At 80 feet above the water, he disengages the autopilot and pulls back on the control column. The captain reaches forward, grabs his own column, and pushes it down. The two pilots are fighting each other on the controls. The first officer is pulling up. The captain is pushing down. The control columns of an ATR-72 are mechanically linked. The combined force feeds directly into the elevator. The captain is stronger. The aircraft continues to descend. At 35 feet, the first officer slams the throttles to maximum power. The propellers bite. It is too late. At 3 minutes past 8, the ATR-72 strikes the surface of the Mediterranean. The impact registers 3.2 G. The aircraft skips back into the air like a stone. The captain is still pushing down. 2 seconds later, it hits the water again, this time at nearly 4 G. Pieces of the lower fuselage tear away and float on the surface. The captain finally lets go and pulls back. The first officer joins him. Together, they drag the aircraft out of the water. They divert to the city of Nador, where the weather is better. They land. All 54 passengers walk off without a single injury. The captain calls Royal Air Maroc and tells them a bird struck the airplane. He writes the same explanation on the official report. Investigators look at the holes torn through the bottom of the fuselage and do not believe him. They open the cockpit voice recorder. They listen to the captain narrate his own descent. They listen to him tell the first officer to keep going. They listen to the moment he grabs the controls and pushes the nose into the sea. The aircraft survived because of one design choice. The ATR-72 has high-mounted wings. When it struck the water, the engines stayed clear. If they had taken in seawater, they would have torn off, and the airplane would have cartwheeled across the surface. 58 people lived because of where the wings were. The airplane was repaired and returned to service. It still flies around Morocco today. Investigators were never able to confirm what happened to the captain. There is another history of aviation. In that history, an Airbus descending toward San Francisco lined up on taxiways teeming with other jets and converted the runway into the deadliest disaster aviation has ever witnessed. A FedEx cargo plane in the foggy Texan morning landed atop a Southwest 737 taking off in the same runway. A McDonnell Douglas DC-10 tore through one another just off the Japanese coast and rained down in pieces upon the Suruga Bay. In that history, an Embraer, its control systems wired in reverse, struck the Atlantic just off the Portuguese coast, while two F-16 pilots could only observe from above. A Qantas Airbus crossing the Indian Ocean dove into the sea without warning and was never recovered. A turboprop packed with Moroccan tourists crashed face down in the Mediterranean. A Sichuan Airlines jet, during flight over the Tibetan mountains, broke up into pieces. A 747, plummeting 30,000 feet, fell into the Pacific and vanished. In Singapore, on a fog-shrouded morning, an Airbus A380 ripped apart during its ascent, killing all 469 souls on board just above the Indonesian island of Batam. If any of these events occurred, this video would never have existed. It would be another. A video of disasters. These names on the lists studied by pilots. The planes, in histories taught to school children. None of them did. These 10 flights are not in the textbooks. They are something else. They are in the forgotten corners of aviation history, in the addenda of accident reports, the memories of family members, of almost no others. There is not one reason for the salvation of any one of them. One was the result of a controller who looked up at the right moment, another of a first officer who knew that his captain was about to murder him, one of a pilot who guided a critically injured aircraft over country he could not name, another of an engineer, decades prior, who decided that the backup system would sit outside the wing, not inside. Another of a single shoulder strap of nylon webbing. Pilots are paid to fly airplanes. They are also paid to fly planes which are no longer airplanes, cargo holds with engines, aircraft that are wired in reverse, machines which are falling from the sky, planes that are missing parts of their tails, jets with shattered cockpits, aircraft whose computers are actively misleading them. The 10 planes in this video never became the disasters they so narrowly avoided, because at one moment, each was someone else paying attention. A pilot or a co-pilot, a first officer or a captain, the engineer who built the planes many years before, and who knew them like the backs of his hands, though he has never set foot inside one. The air travel industry relies on an invisible army of people, paid in no thanks for what did not happen. If this story touched you, please subscribe to Terra Obscura for many more files, many of which end differently than you expect.